Welcome to the International Atheist Roundtable. I am your host, Ethan Micheal, and we have got some good guests for you. So first and foremost, City Plaza, introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm City Plaza. I'm from Belgium. I'm French, but currently living in Belgium. I'm an atheist also, and have been so for about 3 years. And that's all.
All right, thank you.
That's pretty much it.
Peter.
Yeah, my name's Peter DeTukker. I'm from Holland. Been on social media quite a while after bumping into Kent Hovind and having had trouble recovering from that. I've been an atheist all my life. So at times that is slightly a handicap because you can't you can't see where people are coming from when they have been religious, and that mostly happens when people come from a quite fundamentalist religion. So, but I'm really glad that I'm joined by a couple of people from the U.S. and Canada, great co-hosts. So, that's my end of the story.
Awesome, thank you. Tanjil.
Yeah, I'm Tanjil from Australia. I'm probably most well known for my moderating positions among a lot of atheist groups, particularly the ACA, Atheist Experience, etc. But I've just started my own little channel called the Angry Aussie Atheist, and I won't be debating the existence of God. It's been done to death. No, I'm just making a little series on all the harms of religion. So I have about 174 that I've been listing over the years of individual little harms, and I'll be addressing those. And I'd also like to get a community together, including with our lovely Atheist Pastor, and try and get something on air in Australia that's equivalent to maybe the Atheist Experience.
Ooh, that does sound like a good idea.
Yeah, it's where I'm heading.
Awesome. And then last but not least, Atheist Pastor.
Well, g'day everyone. I'm Chris, also known as Atheist Pastor, and like Tanjil, I'm from that beautiful side of this globe called Australia. And unless you're a flat earther, in which case I'm nowhere. So I'm a former Christian leader who read the Bible, studied theology and ministry, and became an atheist as a result. And I guess I'm big on bringing people together, having communities, and I guess finding helping people find somewhere that they can land when they get out of religion.
Thank you. All right, let's start with the topic. All right, religious diversity in your area. City Plaza, what's it like?
So Belgium is mostly a secular country. There's a king, which is mostly a honorific title, but the royal family is still Catholic. Most people are cultural Catholics. There are very, very few real theists as you see them in the US. And mostly religion is not a topic in any capacity in public area or the political area. Well, at least it's the case in Wallonia, the French-speaking part of the country. I don't know much about the northern part that speaks Flemish, which is close to the Dutch language. But other than that, it's a little bit like France, mostly secular.
Awesome. Peter, and by the way, for those that don't know, Peter is an awesome graphic designer who is one of the unsung heroes in the atheist community because he does work for many people. He reached out to give me a hand, so thank you, Peter.
Yeah, so that is part of what I think is necessary, helping each other.
Sorry, we have a special guest. We got our 6th spot filled. I would like to welcome Jenna Belk.
Jenna.
Hi.
Thank you.
Hey.
How are you?
How are you?
I'm awesome.
Thanks for doing this.
Yeah. Conveniently, I had just gotten done filming another show, so hi.
That's awesome.
You're all warmed up.
I am. I already had everything set up, and I was like, well, I just turn everything back on.
Sweet.
So,
All So sorry, we were talking about religious diversity in the areas, and Peter was just going to talk about what it was like in his area before I interrupted him.
Yeah, I was talking about doing stuff for other channels, the graphics and stuff. The reason I do that is because, and that has to do with the topic at hand. If you have different religious people, they need a different approach. So I'm a firm believer in having multiple channels who address believers, try and engage with them, and so those are the people that I like to support with my graphic stuff. So as for religious diversity, so I'm in the eastern part of Holland, which is becoming more and more non-religious. There's churches for sale almost always because they can't keep them full and they can't sustain them anymore. There are a few pockets here in Holland that are still very religious, but so on the most part, so I think with one of the last polls, it was 80% who identify as non-religious or atheist. So we're heading towards what I think is the right way.
Yeah, I would agree. Moving on to Atheist Pastor.
Well, Australia's,
I should have asked this. Do you want me to refer to you the whole time as Atheist Pastor or Chris?
Chris is fine. I originally came on as Atheist Pastor to do it as a bit of a pseudonym. Then someone threatened to dox me, so I just doxed myself, and now I really don't care. So you know what? You can call me whatever the hell you want. Just don't call me religious. Okay. So look, Australia is virtually a secular country. The statistics show that about 30% of people identify as non-religious, but most people who do identify as religious, it's cultural religious. So there'll be cultural Anglican, cultural Catholic. We do have about probably a 10% Islamic population, and then the rest is sort of made up with various other denominations. About 52-53% are Christian, but the actual, I remember the stats when I was studying ministry, the stats are around about 10% of Australians are church-going Christians, but really probably only about half of them are real Christians. The rest are just sort of nominal Sunday, doing something on a Sunday. Right. So we don't really, I think like most Western nations, there's the implication that if you're a Christian, you're a good person, and there is a little bit of it that seeps into our society, but in general, most Australians don't care. Probably the biggest issue we've got within the atheist community here is most Australians don't care, so we don't have the same support structures that you've got in other parts of the world. So something like the ACA, for instance, it probably wouldn't have the same impact in Australia just because there aren't the same numbers of people having issues getting out of religion. But it is still an issue. It's just on a much smaller scale.
Tanjil.
I actually can't hear Chris at all.
That's a good thing.
He was just moving his mouth. He wasn't actually talking. We were just nodding along.
Okay, so on religious diversity in my area?
Yeah.
So I'm in the southern part of Australia, the southeast, in Melbourne. And to be honest, it very much flies under the radar. Religion isn't something that's blatant. Obviously, we have churches everywhere, predominantly Catholic. But in my part of Melbourne, mostly religious people keep to themselves. It's not overt. There are some more Bible Belt equivalents, but I think they're more in the New South Wales, Queensland areas with the big Pentecostal churches. But yeah, largely I think if you wanted to avoid religion in Melbourne, you'd have a really good chance of doing so.
All right, and Jenna.
I'm in Austin, Texas, and so part of the Bible Belt. And so basically, if you go out into the country, that's where you're pretty much going to find most of your religion, unless, pardon me, unless you're in a certain kind of neighborhood. So it kind of depends on where you are, but it can be a drastic change. It can be night and day, depending on what city, depending on what state, depending on a lot of things. But where I am specifically, I think the city is mostly secular. There's a bunch of churches, but I mean, Austin's pretty weird for being in Texas. It's not a Texas city, so that's a little weird.
So I'm going to leave this open to whoever would like to take this. What is the acceptability of atheism like in your area? Feel free to.
I would say here is pretty much the norm. And one thing Cindy mentioned earlier about the royal family. So we do have a royal family, and they are Dutch Reformed, which is the state religion officially. And I think the best way to get to a secular country is to get a state religion, because then everyone doesn't want to follow suit. I don't know. It might be an idea for the U.S., although seeing what religion can do still in the U.S., it might even be a bad thing. But yeah, here it's pretty much accepted. I've never had any trouble. I grew up in a completely atheist neighborhood.
You're so lucky. You're so lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was 13 when I went to church for the first and last time, which was for a burial service. A friend of mine whose wife had passed away, and she was Catholic. So that's my only encounter really with religion in my own country.
Cindy, you look like you're about to say something.
Yeah. I grew up in France, and my mother was, I don't know, somewhere between Catholic and cultural Catholic. I don't know exactly where she was leaning, but she had a Jehovah's Witness friend, and they used to do some Bible readings. But her friend wasn't trying to bring her to her religion. They were just talking about God and the Bible, and her friend used to bring some books from, Jehovah's Witness books. There's a lot of publications over there, and I read some of them, and I started believing it, but not really with much conviction. And then when I was 8 or 9 years old, I was in a private Catholic school, and one day I had in the morning history classes about dinosaurs, and the afternoon Catholic school and Catholic teachings, and it was Genesis, so Adam and Eve and everything else. So I saw the contradiction and raised my hand and asked, what was it about this contradiction? And she asked me, well, do you believe in God? I said, yes. Well, that's it. And that was her answer. So that's when I realized it's just make believe. It's just the carrot and the stick, like Santa Claus, like everything else. And that's when I stopped believing. And after that, I don't think I've been in contact with religion until I came to Belgium the first time. I was in NATO, so I was surrounded by a lot of Americans. And so that's when I started being around religion again.
See, it's funny that you mentioned that, Cindy, because I remember when I was
taken so well
Hey,
as you would think in a fairly
Tanjil?
low. Oh, sorry. What?
No, would you, since you can't hear Chris right now, could you exit and rejoin? Because he
sorry,
would.
yeah, sure.
Okay, awesome.
He was
Thank
talking?
you. Yeah,
Sorry.
it's okay. It's okay.
No, that's okay. Good.
Chris, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it was. See, normally it's the other way. It's normally we get that delay in the talking over when it's not Aussies, but that's okay. So what I was going to say is what you mentioned with when you were younger and had those issues. That was one of the things that we identified when I was going through ministry training, and the church that I was at. One of the things we did was all our volunteers, especially the ones who were looking after the kids, we always made sure that they were well trained and were able to answer all the those apologetic questions. So when you said that, I thought, you know what, it's funny because that is how a lot of kids fall away from religion. So it's interesting. Sorry, just a complete side note there.
Oh no, that's what we want. We want those side notes. So
good. Well, I got plenty of those.
Please keep chiming in whenever you like.
Excellent.
I can hear you now. Sorry about talking over you before.
No, that's okay. It's you were probably better off before when you couldn't hear me. It's now you've actually got to listen to my voice. It won't feel as international for you with the familiar accent.
You actually have a very nice speaking voice. I very much enjoy listening to you.
I could say the same.
I like you a lot now.
Tanjil, you were going to say something before we had to cut you off.
We in Melbourne. I don't know if it's any different in sort of the more northern states in Australia, but essentially religion is one of those topics that people avoid, and we still very much live under the you must respect religion and you must respect their beliefs. So if people ask, are you religious, and you say, oh no, I'm not really religious, that's taken very well. But if you say you're an atheist, it's almost taken as a declaration of war.
Really?
Yeah, it is. People have a very different response to the word atheist as they do as, I'm not very religious, or I'm not religious. They see it as a positive declaration.
Yeah, it's well, same. I'm in New South Wales, which is the next state north, and it's funny you mention that, because it's very much a case of when you say you're an atheist, it's like you declare a religion, and I actually get the same reaction from saying I'm an atheist as I used to when I'd tell people I was a Christian back in the day. But when I was a Christian, it was funny because I'd be like the anomaly in social circles. It's, I'd sort of be, we'd all go out for a few drinks, and then the more drunk everyone got, the more they want to talk to me about religion and God. Especially knowing that I was doing ministry, and they sort of thought it was a little bit weird first that I was one of those Christians, and then it was a bit weirder that I was sitting there having a beer with them at the same time. But it's very much, religion's just kind of like, we've got churches in Australia, and people will say, I mean, look, pretty much every politician will declare that they're a Christian. We've had one atheist prime minister, or I say one declared atheist prime minister, but it's very much it's that ingrained. So there is probably a little bit too much control with religion, and there's been pushes to get rid of things like the prayer in Parliament and a few other things like that, which tends to, even though we do have only 50% of people declare themselves as Christian in Australia, and out of that, realistically, we know that probably 10% are really hands in the air, Bible believing, I'm going to preach at you kind of Christians. So it's strange that there's still that dynamic. It's like it's a little bit of a hangover of Western civilization and our heritage. So I guess from
most of our prime ministers come from the same schools in New South Wales.
No.
Religious schools. I'm pretty sure most of the prime ministers have all come out of the same group of Christian schools in New South Wales.
No, definitely not. Howard, I think he was private school. Tony Abbott was he was Catholic school. He was going to be a Catholic priest. Morrison, he's public, not private schooled. Rudd's from Queensland. It's Morrison. Our current Prime Minister is religious. I actually know Scott. Funnily enough, I used to go to church with him. And he's very religious. He's very genuine in his religious belief. But a lot of other politicians, I would say, it's not so much political suicide nowadays to say that that you are an atheist or you're not religious, but it's just no one's going to risk sort of alienating that 5% of the voter base when elections are so close.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Jenna, what's it like for atheists in your area since you live in a more progressive town?
To be honest, I would say it sounds like it sounds pretty much the same as Australia. But again, it depends on, like, if I go an hour east of here, for example, I went out there for an event for a friend because I grew up in the country. And so I went out there. And so even meeting up with a friend of mine, we met up with her brother, who is also religious, because everybody out there is religious. And he was mentioning YouTube podcasting and social justice warriors, and he was really intrigued by my thoughts. And so kind of told us, like, well, I'm an activist. I don't know if that's a social justice warrior. He's like, oh, an activist about what? I was like, and met up with my friend later. I was like, so what do I say if he asks me again? Because I don't know. Do you want me to tell him? Like, do you want him to know? And she was like, well, maybe just change the subject. So that's what I mean. That was like, even amongst friends, you know, I grew up around these people. I love them to death. Just bringing up that A word makes it awkward. Right. It's a really good way to shut down a conversation, depending on where you are.
Yeah. So I've often been told that from people who have travelled to the US, Texas, apparently Texas, it's like Australia. The Texans are very much like Australians. So maybe we can get Austin and bring it over here. You won't have those issues.
I looked into moving into Australia, and I don't have like a high enough degree.
So many Americans tell me that.
Yeah.
Am I the only one cutting off?
I'm not cutting off.
We can hear you.
Okay. I can hear
you.
Sorry, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was curious, Jenna. So when you started doing stuff in public, did you get any backlash for that?
I'm still getting backlash. Yeah. Not from the public. Like I'm not a public figure in any way. It's if I go to the APA, people know who I am. So it's not like I have to worry about harassing.
No. I mean, in the area where you live, do people know what you do? Do you get recognized? Because the ACA started off as a public channel on TV, so it might be a bit more well known than other atheist YouTube shows. So I was curious if that ever happened.
I might be too new to know, really. Just because, for example, almost a quarter of the time that I've been an atheist, we've been locked up at home. And so from my understanding, atheism is a very, very small percentage of Austin's population, even in Austin, because even if the people aren't religious, they don't identify as atheists. Most people, I would say, that I know are spiritual in some way. With those people, the word atheist can sometimes throw them off too, just because people don't use that word if they can help it. So when I walk out on the street, people don't know who I am. That's not something I deal with. And so even in my neighborhood, I don't know if I think this is a Texas thing pretty much. Neighborhoods are, if you're not in the suburbs, neighborhoods are spread out that we don't like know all of our neighbors. You know, it's a little more separate. Mm-hmm. And so it's not like there's not like a community where I live necessarily.
Okay. Well, I was just curious because one of my best friends and one of my co-hosts is from a city you might know, Austin, Texas.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does he ever go to the ACA?
I think he's been there once.
What's his name?
Robert Reed.
Robert Reed.
African American, really big guy, played in the NFL.
I don't know. It's been a minute since I've been there.
Yeah, I think it's been a while back though.
Yeah, I don't remember. I'm sorry.
Cindy, what challenges would you say? What? Sorry, what?
No, I just said you're missing out because he's one of the best people I've met online, and I'm not kidding. Not because he's my co-host, but we met on a Christian channel, and pretty much hit it off like that, and have been friends ever since. So.
Oh, I think he's actually interviewing me soon. Nope, I'm thinking of someone else. Just kidding. Sorry.
Actually, I sent you an invite to come on our channel a while back, and I'll see if I can get Robert to co-host. That would be cool.
Well, I think Ethan had a question for Cindy though.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah, sorry. Thank you, Jenna. What are the challenges? Wow, my voice just cracked. Let me try that again. Cindy, what are the challenges for atheists in your area?
None.
None at all?
No, really. In my company, in the people I've been working with in the last 2 years, I could tell you that I know 2 of them are believers, small believers, I would say. The other ones, I have no idea if they are or if they're not, because we never talk about it because it's not a topic here. We don't talk about religion. Even my neighbors, I have no idea.
Is it because you avoid it or because it's just not important?
No, it's just not important. No one talks about it because no one cares.
That's such a weird concept to me.
That sounds awesome.
Granted, yeah, it does. It sounds awesome, but I literally can't picture that because I walk out, especially the area I'm currently in, and I could almost promise you there is not a single atheist in this town. I would be actually genuinely shocked if there was.
That's one thing.
Where are you? Sorry.
No, so I'm outside of Chicago, but in the burbs, and in the burb I am located in is very, very Bible Belt, I guess you could say.
Oh, okay.
Very Republican, conservative. So I would definitely be surprised if there was it'd be cool if there was an atheist in my area, but I don't think there is.
You might be surprised. One of the things actually, and it's interesting that you say that, and I guess it was a bit of a culture shock to me when I first got online, is the difference in, even though Australia and America have got a lot of similarities, culturally we're very much, we're almost on a parallel with each other, but when it comes to the religious side of things, the impact of religion in the United States, the damage it causes people who are trying to get out of it or who are not in it, it's almost, pardon the expression, but it's a foreign concept to me. And it's one of the things that I've struggled to understand is how there can be so much influence in a modern Western society for religious beliefs that really everywhere else in the world, it doesn't seem to have that effect. I understand that there's, the historical, the founding of America and, the Pilgrims things along those lines and that religious aspect there. But I mean, we're talking that's 300, 400 years ago. That hangover is still there and still there as strongly. It amazes me.
Yeah.
And this incorporation goes both ways because that's why you have in the US concepts like you are born Christian, or you can have morals if you don't have any God. Things like that come from the same kind of reflection. They can't imagine that you can live in a country where God doesn't intervene or in any way.
Yeah.
Tanjil, you look like you wanted to jump in at some point.
Oh, I was just going to say the same thing. America is such a paradox with such amazing technology and, space programs and all this wonderful scientific knowledge. And then there's this other, what seems to me to be such a primitive side. It's just such a contrast and quite astonishing. Quite astonishing.
It seems to be really easy to put yourself in your own echo chamber here. I don't know if that's a unique to US kind of thing, but maybe it's in the rural. So where I grew up is about an hour east of Austin, and I would say that where I grew up was about 10 years behind electronically or like technologically. So my husband is like 7 years older than I am, so he was you would assume that he was raised completely in a different way than I was, but I was kind of behind. So I was raised with playing outside and no internet and all that. And so it's almost like once you jump outside of the cities in the US, it's almost like you do kind of jump back in time just a little bit.
Yeah. It might have something to do with personality types too. I think Australians are a little more reticent than some Americans. Some Americans are very loud and proud and very vocal, whereas I think a lot more Australians are slightly less vocal, perhaps. Maybe. That's
all that patriotism stuff, that's just strange.
Oh, okay. I used to do that shit, man.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Like, wait a second. You're kneeling to the American flag? You should go to jail. You're being disrespectful. And it's like, I look back and go, oh, how could you be so stupid? Like, I wish we would stop teaching American pride. It is, to me, harmful. I just saw an article earlier where our lovely president wants to punish people by a year in prison for burning an American flag. Like, I'm sorry, like, that's just asinine. It's a flag.
That surprises me because that's very much against free
First
speech.
Amendment.
Well, it seems like there seems to be a large correlation with military and religion in this country, because I know that there's a lot of religion in my family and military background in my family. And so when the flag is brought up in my family, that is something you respect, because that is something that people in my family have died for. So that's why.
Right. It's like they don't always think it through. They think just because like I have family I had family in the military, and I could tell you that family member would not give a shit, because that's what he fought for. Like burning, he fought for your freedoms to burn that flag if necessary. Now, he wouldn't be happy doing it, but he would be okay with it because that's part of being free.
And the other thing that I don't get is people get riled up when it's about the flag. The flag represents the country, and when you then see people when there are decisions being made in Washington, and there's going to be stuff that is implemented throughout the U.S., then suddenly they all get their knickers in a twist, because now the government is interfering with the states, and that's not allowed. The states have to have their own laws and rules. So I don't get it. If the flag is so important, the flag is the country. Why aren't you supporting the country? Why aren't you
The people.
working towards a way where the laws are equal in all of the states, which would be a good thing to go for? That's the part that I don't get.
Yeah, the united part of the United States of
Yes,
America.
exactly. And that is what the flag stands for. And if you get mad when someone burns the flags, and why do you get mad also if you've got a federal law implementing that you can have same-sex marriages, for instance? Because now suddenly the states all need to have their independent laws. And when it comes to abortion, they need independent laws, because we can't have that. We can't have the government telling us what to do. Yeah. It's the fact that that's so far apart that's the thing that I'll never get.
So what I think is that so with the symbolism, there's a correlation between the religion and the politics. Is there's the chalice, or the cross or the crown of thorns or whatever it is that symbolizes something. And so to those people that have all of these symbols that they revere in that way, it's easy for them to have symbols and other things that they treat the same way. Especially when they're taught about how much you're supposed to love your country just in every day. We say the pledge every morning before school, all that. And so when you take that and then you just take the same kind of logic and you apply it that way, it just seems like that's just what we think we're supposed to do. And you have the right to speak. You have the right to free speech as long as you agree with me, kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's where I think that a lot of the problems that the U.S. is currently struggling with are coming from religion.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not only the flag, it's also education.
Yes.
You're being taught to believe the guy who is preaching in church. So when an authority tells you that parts in science aren't real, you just believe it because they can't be lying. And that's, to me, it's mind-boggling. It's, as I said, I stumbled on a video from Kent Hovind, and I thought, there's no way in hell people believe this stuff. It's absolutely impossible. Because I've never met a Christian who actually believes the creation story in the Bible.
I'll introduce you to a couple.
Yeah,
I've come across doing our show. I've come across several. I've had Kent Hovind himself on, and worse, cite him Rugenkate. So, but
are you okay?
To me, I think a lot of the problems come from religion. If you're raised in a mindset where you need to listen to people who know better than you, that works across the board, and you don't even think for yourself because it's not needed.
Yeah.
You're told what is right and what is wrong, so there's no need to think for yourself. And to me, that's the big problem.
One thing I will say with American patriotism, that's not necessarily a religious thing. I think religion has kind of got its claws into it in the last few years. But where that actually came out of the 1950s and the McCarthyist era, fighting against the communists. It was very much that the communists could be anywhere. It was very much that strong political divide, and that's where a lot of the American patriotism has sort of popped in. Now that's probably been taken in by, I guess, a lot of it's merged with a lot of the religious side of things, because religion in America is probably stronger it's probably more vocal now than it was pre-World War II. Pre-World War II, America's a very obviously I wasn't there, but professionally I'm a historian, and one of the things I have looked into and studied is how religion has sort of evolved over the years. But religion and the extent of religious influence in America is actually very much a new concept, and it has entwined with that patriotism.
So I knew that, in terms of like the flag and the pledge, that came around, and I believe it was like, the pledge, I believe it was 1954. Like around that,
right.
And then before, I don't think it was before until the communist stuff that they began putting even "In God We Trust" on the money. I believe prior to that, it was prior to that, it was only on there sporadically.
Well, one of the first things that communist nations will do is they'll generally go in and eradicate religion, because for them religion is something that takes away from the state religion, I guess, so to speak. If you look at communist nations, North Korea is probably the best example. North Korea is a theocracy. It's communist, but it's a theocracy around the Kim dynasty and the Kim family. And a lot of communist nations, you'll see in the imagery, it's the Soviet Union, whether it was Stalin, Khrushchev, Lenin, they're almost revered as religious figures. So that's why communism will go and get rid of things like Christianity, Islam. In fact, the war in the 1980s in Afghanistan that the Soviets fought, that was because they were concerned that radical Islam was a little bit too close to their borders, and they didn't want that coming in. So which is an irony when you look at everything now. So that's how, I guess, the religious side of things got entrenched in that, was because, well, they want to change our way of life, so they want to stop us from going to church, and all of a sudden it was very much that defensive. No one's taken away my God, my gun, my flag. It was and it just sort of has, I guess, boomed a bit from there. So it's an interesting diet, but it is something that religion has always been an integral part of the United States, but not like it is now.
I think
this is not an American, so apologies if I'm.
No, you're fine.
I think the religious principles are used across the board, and that's not only in communists are. That is pretty much, communism is based on religion. It is taking the useful parts from religion and implementing those in communism. But if you look at America, I think it's happening there as well. You got the scare tactics. People who are pro-guns will tell you that you can't take away my gun because you're taking away my safety, not realizing that if there are less guns, you will have less gun crime. I live in a country where there's very little gun crime because guns are illegal here. But it's all across the board. And if you
say guns,
what I also think in the US is the political system. That's almost religious. You're a Republican or you're a Democrat, and if you're a Republican, pretty much your entire family has been Republican. And if you veer away from that, it's like going to a different religion, and not so from Christianity to Islam, for instance. It's that big a deal. Whereas as in my country, we have several political parties, and it's just completely different. You go for the party who has the better program, and that can be different at every election. So there's no big loyalty to a specific political party.
And you have more than two political parties.
Obviously.
Very, very important.
Yeah.
There seems to be a correlation with guns with conspiracy theories. Like they want to take our guns away because they don't want us to be able to defend ourselves, because they want to, I guess, bring on a communist nation kind of thing. That's what I've noticed.
Yeah, so the gun side of things has always baffled me. And look, I'm someone who I'm right wing, and I'll just clarify, it's very different to be right wing here.
I was just going to say,
so it's so I'm what you'd call centre right. I'll vote for the right wing party here, not the left wing party in general. But the one thing is, and this is something even amongst my very conservative friends, we don't get the guns thing. In America, it makes zero sense to us. So our right wing party eliminated or brought in gun control in the mid-90s after we had a massacre. And when we say gun control, we got rid of things like semi-automatic, automatic weapons. Basically, you've got to have a pretty good reason to have a gun. You don't just have the right to walk around with a gun. In fact, I've never ever seen anyone walking around apart from law enforcement with a gun on their side. And I've never held a gun, never shot a gun. I've seen a gun maybe a handful of times in my life. So, but by the same token, we don't have school shootings. We don't have mass murders. We'll have, I think since the mid-90s, the only mass shooting we've had was within a family group. It was one person who, in a rural area, went a little bit crazy and shot 5 members of their family. But we don't have those same issues. And I just don't understand the arguments. I think it would be very hard culturally to take guns away from Americans. But I just, and I'll talk to people who are
civil war.
Yeah, the thing is, I'll talk to people who are progressive left wing in the US, and they'll say, no, you can't take our guns. I don't get it, but cultural differences.
Well, they use it. It's a sport. I mean, a lot of people use guns here almost as frequently as they drink alcohol. And I'm not saying that they do those at the same time.
I hope not.
But that's a common thing. Like when you go to a family event, sometimes they're shooting shotguns. They're shooting guns for fun because that's just what you do in Texas.
As an observer, it seems just like residual from the War of Independence. It's just to me, it just seems like an attitude passed down.
I could see that.
Did it then? Would need it again sometime. Yeah,
I could see that. But how do you take that away? How do you take away something that's been as ingrained in people as drinking alcohol? That's something that's not going away to ever. I don't think
you can. You need to change the culture and the attitudes around it so they're just not taken up as frequently. But how you get rid of people who, it's my goddamn right. I don't know. But yeah, it needs to be a huge shift in culture and attitude so that people just don't keep buying them.
Mm-hmm.
It won't happen. It will not happen.
I know.
It's not. You can bring in some changes. I mean, you can. I don't see the need for people to have the right to have an automatic or a semi-automatic weapon, unless they're in a particular circumstance. But I guess realistically, it's not going to change in the US.
Yeah, the only way it can happen is it's step by step and over a very, very long time. Otherwise,
I guess we're already starting.
Yeah, the problem is the right wings genuinely just don't listen. It's like they have this block in their head of just no gun, American pride, Second Amendment. It's like this thing that just prevents them from actually understanding.
As long as the NRA keeps funding all the right-wing politicians, all the Republican politicians, nothing will change.
They fund the left as well.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of money involved. Keep in mind that a lot of people earn their money from selling guns. What baffles me is that if you look at the Constitution, it does say you have the right to bear arms, but in a well-regulated militia. And that part seems to be skipped all across the board because who's regulating the militia?
Yeah.
There's no regulation. It's everyone for themselves. So that might be a good starting point to say, well, if we're going to have that law, let's at least enforce it, and the people who want to bear arms have to be part of some kind of well-regulated militia, and then you'll have to have regulations for that militia. That might be a way to tackle it, at least to make a start.
Good angle.
Yeah.
But there's also got to be a want for a change. I mean, at the end of the day, we can stand here as people outside the US and say, this is what we think, but it's not our culture. It is very much an American cultural thing. And as strange as it is, and as much as we can blatantly disagree with it, I think we still do need to respect that culture, and we need to respect that this is something that's been ingrained for so long in the American psyche, to the point where it's a part of the American Constitution. So, I mean, look, I look at it, the British aren't going to invade anytime soon, which is why it was initially put there. And I'm not British, but as a member of the Commonwealth, I can assure you we're not coming. But I think that it's as much as, and I'm very mindful of, we can sit here on the outside and just say it's crazy, it's insane, I don't understand it. But we're also, if I was born in Texas, I might have a very different viewpoint. And the same can be said for any of us, because that would be the culture in which we were raised.
I hate to disagree with you, but I don't think we need to respect it.
Exactly.
Not even if it's a culture, if it's responsible for innocent death, I don't think that we need to respect that. And I would put that the same as respecting a religion.
Respect the right that people can hold that view. I think people
Yeah.
can hold any view they want.
Yes,
I don't have to.
not-
Okay, I don't
not the
respect.
view
I don't
itself.
respect guns, but
Not respect
okay.
the
So
view
sorry,
itself.
I'll reword. I don't. I disagree vehemently with guns, but I also respect the right that if that's their culture and that's what they believe, that's the right to believe that. People can believe whatever they want. I don't have to agree with it. I don't have to respect or like what they believe, but people can believe whatever they want. And we've got to understand that if we were born in the United States, we would potentially hold different viewpoints.
To me, it's a
possible,
little bit
but
like vaccines.
if you start there, then do you need to respect people's beliefs when it comes to abortion and them shooting down laws where abortion is made legal?
I respect their right to hold those views. That people can hold any view they want. I don't have to agree with it, but they can hold those views.
Yeah, but it's
I think, and that's the difference. They can hold their views as long as they do not impose laws on other people with different views.
Yes, I would agree with that part.
I've got no problem with that. But I also respect people's right to have the view. I think Jenna's been trying to say something for a bit.
No, I agree that you can't really. You have to respect that they have the right to believe whatever they want. But as far as I actually just did a talk on moral ethics versus legal ethics. You have the right to believe whatever you want, but as far as acting it out and affecting other people, I think that we're all in agreement that whatever affects the least amount of people in a harmful way is preferable.
Yes.
But when it comes to these people, their priorities are different. As being a girl who grew up in Texas, and their priorities are different. People feel it like they're being attacked, and they feel like they're misunderstood, and they spend their time hunting and shooting, and it's a leisurely thing to I would say almost all of them. So for people to come, what it seems from the outside, and want to take it away, it seems like, oh, well, you just don't understand me. I'm not going around shooting people like for example, you'd hear about gas station shoot ups. It just doesn't appear the same to them. And so, yeah, I think that's a good point, is that the best way probably is to try to understand them and try to understand why they hold those views first. And then we can try to influence them in a different way. I might not be the best person because I'm now kind of like an ex Texan. I don't know.
Ex-Texan.
I might be like influenced by the devil. I might not be trustworthy anymore. So.
Well, another thing is, I think the more we engage on the internet and have different countries, people from different countries talking to each other, you get an exchange of views, and that might shift things as well. Because I still think that that's a really powerful tool, and I still think that conversation is a really powerful tool,
Mm-hmm.
which is why. I've changed the format of our show to make it less aggressive when talking to theists. And then I saw you with Anthony a few weeks ago. I think we should all at least follow and watch Anthony and learn from that when we have conversation with people, because that's the least intimidating way to have a conversation.
Yep.
And I'm still learning. I'm not great. I'm not to where if anyone has seen Aaron Ra trying street epistemology, I still think that's one of the funniest things I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Me too. Just for listeners, the Anthony that he's referring to is Anthony Magnabosco. He's known as one of the people who's gotten the street epistemology movement started.
Yes, and someone who's still perfecting it and making sure that so he gives classes, and he started a Discord server where a lot of people can come and learn, and there's a whole community revolving. But I think that's mostly due to Anthony's work. So I think he needs to get the credit for that at least.
Yeah,
he's the Pope of street epistemology.
Yes.
But I like to say something about this guns discussion. If I'm a mother and I can say it's my right to decide everything about my child, and if I don't want to have him vaccinated, then I can. But since not having my child vaccinated can have a negative impact on other people, then the state has the responsibility to limit this right. I think it's the same for guns. The
Excellent
state
point.
the state has the responsibility to limit the use of guns because it has a negative impact on the society as a whole.
But when the state is run by people who agree with the country people,
Yeah,
that changes things.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think, isn't there a difference though between shooting as a sport and demanding a right to, open carry and all this sort of thing? And we have gun clubs too. We have plenty of people who love guns as a sport. But they wouldn't sit there and say they demand the right and it's their right.
I think it depends on the person, depends on a lot of things. But I think that it's just that there's kind of an assumption that, well, we're raised to respect guns.
Yeah.
So we know better kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I guess, do we know better though?
Some people do, some people don't.
Right. That's what I need to have, is a round table on the gun debate. Get, some good pro-Second Amendment people. That would be a good conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
It would be a livid conversation.
Certainly be an interesting one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Depending on who you have on the panel, I might not be the best one to be on that panel because I'm pretty direct when it comes to that, and that's another thing. I mean, Dutch people are that direct.
Right.
When you got an opinion, you just say it and see what happens.
I wish everyone was like that.
And that's not always appreciated. Yeah. So, and I can disagree with people, and I can vehemently disagree with people, and still be the best of friends, as long as you're honest towards each other. I mean, you don't have to agree on everything, but be honest about what you think, about what you feel, about what you think should happen in the community. My best friend is a Christian, and the reason that I was anonymous when I started out was because he was a Christian, and we were working together, and pretty much all of his clientele are churches or religious organizations. So that would throw a wrench in the wheel when they then go on YouTube and find the guy who is helping them designing their church doing an atheist podcast. And when he found out, he said, well, if they're going to refuse our work because of what you do, they're not worth our work. So you just put your name out there and your face, because I don't want people who discriminate. So that's, but as I said, you need to be able to be honest with people. That's a really good thing.
I think doing things like this helps. And when those videos that went around for a little while, people like standing up for people in fast food restaurants. I think stuff like that helps encourage people to do more things. When they see just a clip of somebody doing it, it kind of gives you that drive. Oh, I want to be that person, I think it's a little more boosting.
Yeah. And maybe get rid of the scare tactics.
That would be nice.
Yeah. So I've seen so many preachers say, well, if we give up our guns and you're in a bank and the bank robber comes in and everybody on the floor, what if there are then 80 guns pointed at the bank robber? Well, I'll tell you what happened. It's going to cause 40 people to die because you're standing across him.
Yeah.
So you're going to shoot your own people. That's not going to work. That's not going to go down well. And
how well are these people trained?
Yes.
Yep. Most people.
That's always been a poor argument, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when no one has a gun, maybe the bank robber doesn't have a reason to shoot people because he can just scare them, get away with the money, and no one gets hurt, and they'll get him.
Yeah,
eventually.
let's all bring on more violence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See what happens. See how much it calms down.
Yes, exactly. That's the part that I don't get. And when you got people who run a church are promoting violence, that's another thing that I don't.
It's frustrating. Like, these are supposed to be these are people that call us immoral and evil on a daily basis, and here they are proposing violence. I don't. That actually drives me up a wall.
I think it's to make themselves feel better.
Is it necessarily promoting violence, or is it just? I'm mindful of it's a political opinion in the US, and it's a political opinion that doesn't seem to have a vote because there's people on the right and left who hold opinions either way on it. I don't think any left-wing presidential candidate would ever propose to get rid of guns because they'd lose an election very, very quickly.
Yes.
So I don't know if it's necessarily and look, I'm no fan of religion. I don't necessarily know if it's something that you can bash the churches on. It is a political step.
I can stick to Hovind. Hovind said on air that if you catch a thief, let him choose. Either chop off his hand or kill him.
Serious? Hovind says a lot of things.
Because that's what the Bible says. Steve Anderson, same thing. Now you got the NIFB who wants to kill homosexuals. And those are the people that say, well, let's look at the Bible for punishment. If you steal once, we'll cut off your hand. If you steal twice, you're going to get killed. That's it.
I think it's worth remembering, though, those people are the minority. They're very much the minority. And there are those extremists. Look, and this is something I'm always mindful of as an atheist, and especially having come from, having been so involved with the Christian movement. Most Christians are good people who just hold a very different belief. They're not horrible people. They're not proposing that once a month women should go and stand at the city gates. In fact, in most churches, all that Old Testament stuff isn't really discussed. There's a great example, the Westboro Baptist Church. I mean, everyone knows who they are, but they've got a congregation of about 20. They're not a big church, and they're certainly
really that small?
Yeah, it's one family. It's
pretty much one family.
Yeah,
they got pretty popular for such a small family.
Because what happens is, and it's like anyone, if you make an extremist statement, and look within our community, and someone like, and this isn't in any way being negative towards Aaron Ra. Okay, we were talking about before when he goes out and does the street preaching, it's very different from an Anthony Magnabosco. Now, the way Aaron Ra does it is not the best way to get people converted or to win people from the other side. But what that does is that's something that plays to an audience. It plays to us as an audience, as atheists, because it makes us feel good about what we believe. It's the same thing as a Ray Comfort will do. These people are not representative of the majority of religious believers. Most people just want to go about their business, want to live their life. Look, they believe something that they probably don't really understand. I mean, I believed it until I went and studied it. I was very much into it. I would have preached for hours and hours and hours. It was when I went and studied it, then that's when I got the issues, and that's when the confusion sort of set in for me. Most people don't do that. So I think we've got to be very careful globally within the atheist community not to demonize people just because of the belief they hold.
Go ahead, Sydney.
Yeah, I think the issue with the US is that the country has a culture of violence. Violence is an answer to everything, whether it's war to other countries that they want to take something from, or whether it's disagreement, so that's why you need guns. And I forgot the point I was going to make, but yeah, I think it's not about just the guns themselves. It's not about what the churches teach. It's about this mentality that violence is the reason, is the solution for everything. And
sorry.
And yeah, that's why I'm not saying it's everyone, of course, but I think it feels like it's a culture, and that's why you have so many people advocating to stand your ground. You're allowed to kill anyone who wants to steal you something. Like what a guy's life, even a thief, is worth less than what they could steal in your house.
Right.
That's nonsense. You know, a few years ago there was this story about I think it was 3 or 4 kids, 17 years old. They were talking and smoking weed, and at some point they wanted to get some money, and so they went to a house where they knew there was a single guy, and his truck wasn't outside. So they said, okay, let's go inside and see if we can take something and we can sell it. And so they knocked on the door to see if the guy was there. No one answered. They knocked and rang, and no one answered. So they entered, and none of them had weapon. None of them, neither a knife or a stick or anything. And before getting in, they made sure there was no one else in the house. And so when I got in, they made noise, and the guy actually was there, and he was sleeping, and he went down, and he stood his ground. He had a gun. He killed one, and he shot the second one in the leg. And so the owner didn't get sentenced for anything because he stood his ground. And the guy who had shot in the leg has been convicted for the murder of the other one. He took 50 years of jail for that. 50 years.
I think circumstances, though, there, and this is probably more of an overreaching issue with guns in America. If someone breaks into your house and you're in America, if it was in Australia, I'm going to assume they probably don't have a gun. In America, if someone's breaking into my house, I think you have to almost assume that they've got a gun, because it's just so many people have guns in the US. So I'm always mindful of, I mean, this is obviously something that's gone through a legal process, and none of us will know the complete circumstances of these. And sorry, maybe you do, Cindy. I guess I don't, but I guess from my viewpoint, we don't know what happened in those seconds when this person was startled and saw these two strangers in the house, how they've reacted, especially when you're in a place where everyone's got a gun.
So sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, kind of along to what they're both talking about, is that, so having been basically like one of those people, it seems like at least I used to be the kind of person who was just in my own world. And I just thought, well, as long as I'm doing whatever I think is right, you don't have the right to infringe it on me. It doesn't matter what I think is right. As long as I think it, I have that right, and you have that right. But it's like I didn't have the ability to think of the entire population as a whole as like working together. It seemed more of like a everyone for themselves kind of thing. And with the violence, kind of keeps that going because of I think it's religion that pushes the punishment. That creates violence when you talk about physical punishment, which is common. And so it's just, to them, it's, well, I'm just doing what I think is right. You don't have the right to infringe on me.
Yeah.
Isn't that also part of the problem when you got the Bible that first of all tells you that you can hit your children if they don't listen, don't spare the rod.
That's what they do.
Yes.
Yeah. And they think that's right. That's what they're supposed to do.
And if you don't follow what at least what your church accepts as the laws coming from God, then you will go to hell, which is a punishment.
Mm-hmm.
And doesn't that reflect on how they want to punish people on earth? Because I live in a country where we need to rent out our prisons because we don't have enough criminals anymore.
To Belgium.
We rent. No, does Belgium rent some?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I knew Norway rented a couple of prisons here.
Wow.
I didn't know that Belgium rented some too. But that's a luxury you have if you do not only imprison people, but you try while they're in prison to re-socialize them so they can when they get out, they're better people than when they got in. And that's something that you don't see in every country. And that's where I think things can be learned from how our government addresses that. And we also don't go for maximum sentences. A life sentence here in Holland is pretty rare. You have to be commit a pretty heinous crime to get a life sentence.
Maybe it starts with education, because it seems like education just doesn't seem like an area of interest to Americans.
No, I fully agree.
And so if we would educate ourselves more about the world and other countries and how they've done things and the history and how we've done things in the past and why that didn't work, then I think that we would have this as less of a problem. But I think it kind of starts with education.
I think so too. And what mind-boggling to me is that you got school boards, people who are not educated to make decisions about what a curriculum is. And those are the people who decide on what the curriculum is. That's what led to the Dover trial, Kitzmiller versus Dover. You need to have, when it comes to a science, you need scientists to decide what the curriculum is. When it comes to languages, you need to have linguists who decide. I think that's how that should be. Those should be the people who make the textbooks, and it shouldn't be decided by people who have no education themselves to decide whether or not you're using the right textbook.
It sounds obvious.
Yes,
can I just add one thing about the gun debate? I think it's a mistake to remove religion from that debate, because religion is what also pushes gender roles, and I've seen it more than enough times to be convinced. So many women will say, a real man will carry a gun, a real man will protect his family, a real man, blah, 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 blah. And that's part of the gender role issue that's actually pushed by religion as well. I don't think it's easily extracted from this debate on guns.
I think you're right.
So much
and
religion.
with dads too.
And also it also protects the religion. If you go back in history, I mean, you had the Crusades, you had the Spanish Inquisition. I don't live far away from a church where there's still cages hanging from the steeple, where people who went against that particular religion were tortured and then hung outside the steeple, left to die in view of everyone, as a clear sign to just follow suit.
Well, the Bible's very punitive. Everything about the Bible is about punitive measures by gods and people.
I think what you just said about the role of religion, it ties with another big problem, I think also related to violence, is the us versus them mentality you have a lot in the US.
Yeah.
Because you have, of course, the racism thing, you have the rich versus poor, you have the good people against the criminals, who are all the time. You have these divisions, and the others are seen as less human. That's why you can do with them anything you want. You can kill a criminal because you're a good person, and he's a criminal, so he deserves death. Obviously,
I'm a criminal.
Yeah, so you deserve death too.
So
but I think that's a big problem. The us versus them in the US. That's
you're right.
I don't know. I think we're stretching though if we're blaming the religion for that. I think a lot of that comes down to human nature.
It's not about blaming, it's about excluding. I think it's intrinsically entwined. I wouldn't lay all the blame to that. I mean, obviously there's issues with machoism and, you know, people with overblown senses of masculinity and all that sort of thing. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that play into it. And religion, I think, is definitely in there with it.
I think it's probably more the cultural aspect. I think because the religion is culturally entwined with, and I mean, we're all from, you know, a part of Western civilization. So I can tell you, when it comes to like biblical punishments and things like that, I can assure you 99% of church-going, Bible-believing, hand-in-the-air, happy-clapping Christians have got no idea about it, because they don't go into that. They get spoon-fed the love your neighbor, or, you know, the happy psalms and things like that. The rest of it doesn't come into it. I mean, the Old Testament, I didn't start reading the Old Testament really until I was studying at a bachelor level. And that's when I had the issues.
We were.
Like the American thing, eye for an eye, and, you know, I just see a completely different culture in America.
I also think religion has a lot more of a foothold in the U.S. than it has everywhere else.
Hell yeah. Absolutely.
So
really, even more than
everywhere else, Western, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Essentially, America's like a Middle Eastern nation.
Kind of, almost.
It is. I mean, you have a look at the rule.
I don't think the Middle East take religion as seriously as widespread as it is in America. I really don't. I tend
to agree with you, actually. Yeah.
Am I just completely desensitized, or what?
Except maybe Saudi Arabia, which is a very, very strong theocracy. But other than that, yeah.
Well, there are a few more pockets. So as I said, my best friend is a Christian. He's a Syrian refugee. Spent a year in prison in Syria under the Islamic regime. Was tortured for being a vocal Christian, and that was because he was working for national TV, and they couldn't have someone like him there. So after several warnings, he was just picked up and tortured. And so there are more countries where, and predominantly the Islamic countries, where religion has a really good foothold. But when I say when I single out America, it's more the Western countries and if you look at it on a bigger scale, if you go to the Islamic countries, that's where education isn't great either, and is most likely held back by the Islamic regimes. So it's, as Jen said, it does start with education. You need to teach people how to think, not what to think. That is the most important thing.
Probably more to teach people to think, not how to think.
There you go.
Yeah.
Why to think?
and when?
Yes, why and when. Those are two questions that aren't really posed too much.
So I do want to get to, since we're getting close on time, I do want to get to the last question, and I do want everyone to answer this as truthfully as possible. So starting with you, Cindy Plaza, how do people in Belgium view Americans or America?
You mean this last 3 years, or the
How about both?
So yeah, since Trump has been in office, I think it's been worse and worse. There are still people in France and in Belgium who are trying to defend Trump, but I think it's because of this mentality that they don't want to be mainstream, following mainstream ideas. And since Trump is mocked by everyone, they just want to take the other way. But other than that, yeah, Trump and the US has been the laughing stock of the world since Trump took office in every possible way. I mean, he's lying 16 times a day. on average. That's something on a scale never seen before. He offers the most stupid ideas, like sending Canadians on the Notre Dame when it was burning. So yeah, I think because of Trump, the U.S. and the country as a whole lost all credibility on the planet, because the biggest threat now is being China. And since Trump is very, very friendly with all theocrats, he's helping in a way all theocrats to grow, whether it's Trump, whether it's Putin, Kim Jong-un, Xi Jinping, Erdogan, Assad, all of them, he's been helping them in a way or another. So he's dangerous to the US, but also to the world. And
I don't disagree with that.
And on the last note, something I wanted to say earlier, but I didn't get a chance. Sometimes I had this discussion a few days ago. Sometimes it feels like the US and the world would be better off if the civil war had ended with two different countries.
That's a whole topic I'm not even going to touch on.
Yeah.
But I think it's a topic to discuss, because if you remove the 7 countries that wanted to keep their slaves, I think the US is a very, very different country now.
Yeah.
Peter.
Yeah, I'm pretty much with Cindy. So the moment Trump took office, we had a daily report on TV, on national TV, stupid things Trump has said today. and that ran quite a while, and that was at the start. And I think
was it really called that? Stupid things Trump said today?
Something like that.
Okay.
I'm not entirely sure what the exact title was, but it was a segment in a TV show that was on daily, and they just watched him daily say something completely stupid, and pointed out that when he's at this event, he will say this, and when he's at another event, he say the exact opposite. And everyone's cheering him on because he's the greatest, and no one notices he just 24 hours ago he said the opposite. So it's fairly obvious it's someone you can't trust. I do have to apologize to the American people for Betsy DeVos, who's Dutch.
So that's your shame. Shame.
So many people that I would see as kind of ridiculous when it comes to religion come from Holland. Henk Hanegraaff is probably a well-known name. Zij ten Bruggenkate or Zij ten Bruggenkate. Dutch. There are a lot of Dutch people in very fundamentalist churches all across the world. So
well, we
I take it they left here because they have no foothold. But yeah, I think the U.S. lost a lot of credibility, at least in since Trump
took office,
got into office, whereas Obama was, I think, here pretty popular. He was seen as a miracle leader. He was, at least from when I started watching, I think the guy who when it comes to how the rest of the world views it, was the best president they had.
Interesting. Okay. Tanjil.
Can you ask the question again?
Yeah. How would you say you or people from your country view America and Americans?
America and Americans.
Or
Okay,
however you want
America-
to tackle that question.
Yeah. As far as America goes, I think I can speak on behalf of my immediate circle. Well, it's a bit of a conundrum. This is why Australia is so interested in American politics, because generally what flows out of America affects Australia very, very much indeed. So it's really important to me, at least, that America sets a good example for Australia. We've even had politicians trying to change our Medicare, which is what you would call universal medical care. Is that what you would call free medical, essentially? We've seen them try and dismantle that, and that's really frightening. The way I see America, it's almost like the Truman Show. Everybody's just living in a giant advertisement, very commercial. I mean, you've even put a couple of movie stars into power, which is quite confusing. Just very commercial, very money driven, very venal in that respect. So not favourable in many respects. But at the same time, you're also leaders in a lot of the STEM areas, so science, technology, engineering, and medicine. And then you have these that paradoxical pagan primitive belief systems. It's really confusing for me. Americans in themselves, culturally, you're far more outspoken than we are on the whole, I would say. Obviously, everybody has their passionate members of community, but I think in a general sense, Americans are a bit more confident to speak out, can be a little bit more brash at times. That's about all I can really tell you, because obviously everybody feels a bit differently. I mean, we have our Trump supporters here. Absolutely. There's people who just think it's wonderful that he's so masculine and, the alpha chimp who's going to save the world. But I only see him ruining the position of America as a superpower, because he seems to be wanting to destroy relationships with trade, close on down, manufacturing. It's almost like he is turning the country into a communist country, in that he wants to just alienate everything and everyone and close down the country. It's really bizarre.
Thank you. And then Atheist Pastor, Chris.
All right. So I hold a very different view to probably a lot of the ones here. Australia and America, we're best friends. We're BFFs. We're the only country that has followed America into every single conflict since the Second World War. We have a very close cultural relationship. Like Tanjil said, a lot of what happens in the US will flow on over to here. So we do hold a lot of interest in what happens. I mean, we're probably all brought up with the same TV shows as you were in the US. Yeah, the sports are a little bit different, but we do have. We're very, very close. Culturally. Look, I guess I can understand, and I do see this a lot on Twitter and places where there tends to be a lot more people who are left-leaning. There's a lot of Trump hate. I don't see a lot of that Trump hate as much. I think people who hate him absolutely hate him. I don't see a lot of people who really love him as such. But he's just seen as another president. We do see a lot of and I'm going to get hate for this. There is a lot of fake news that surrounds him, and that's a problem, because the thing is, when he does do something that's genuinely wrong or silly, or what will happen is most people will just go, it's ignored, because the impact of it is gone. And it's even things like he made a joke in poor taste at his rally, which was that, the reason that the numbers are up are because we're testing more people. If you want the numbers to go down, well, we'll stop testing. That was a joke. It wasn't a good joke, but it was a joke. It was absolutely a joke. It wasn't a good joke, but that's his sense of humor, whatever. But then the way that's reported is an issue. So we do see a lot of that, and there's a lot of eye rolling and a lot of the stuff. Look, Trump is basically, and from a historical point of view, Trump's just an old school protectionist. He's going back to the pre-World War II, the American isolationist, which America was founded on those isolationist principles. I can tell you, as someone who owned a business that dealt exclusively and imported from the US, the cost for me to do business went through the roof because the American dollar is strong. Now, that's a temporary thing. That's something that it isn't going to last and certainly doesn't work in a modern global economy. So that's something I disagree with him on vehemently. And I think most people internationally do, because it is harder to do business with the US at the moment. Now, can I understand that there were a lot of jobs in the US going offshore? Yeah, okay. I get that. There probably is a balance that needed to be made. I think he went to an extreme, but that's the problem with the US. The US, there's no center. You've got two extremes. You've got the Democrats at the moment, and from what I can see, are to the far left, and the Republicans seem to be to the far right. And there's no sensible centre in the middle. In Australia, where we're different is we've got our left-wing and our right-wing party, but they're both very much towards the centre. We actually had a prime minister at one point who the joke was he should have been in the other party, and the opposition leader, who was in the left-wing party, he probably should have been in the right-wing party. And that's how centred our politics can get. I mean, we just... There's things that, there's obviously the show of politics, but not to the extent that you've got in the US, where it's a cult of personality. It's who can get the best soundbite, that best 3-second grab for the news. Incidentally, the US media, they love Trump because he is so good for their advertising, because Trump says something, whatever they want to put out, everyone clicks on it, everyone comments on it. It just gets so many hits. They will keep him in power as long as they can, because he's newsworthy. It's the media not liking Trump. Never ever buy into that. They love it for financial reasons. But look, ultimately, how do we Americans? You're a bit brash. You're loud. You're patriotic. But we like you. We genuinely, really, really like you. We don't agree with everything you do. There's a few things we scratch our head, but just like any friendship, it's we've got your back. We'll always have your back, even where we disagree with you on certain things. Like we weren't that big on things like the Iraq War, but you know what? We've got your back. We're your friend, and we'll always be your friend.
That's good to hear. Jenna, what are your thoughts?
I think that Texas sees themselves as not the U.S. So, I think that Texans may have a different view of the U.S. Like, for example, something you will hear often is, well, we should just secede. We should just break off and be our own country again. And I think that would be a bad thing. Because it would be, I think, kind of like if the Civil War had ended up being two countries. But yeah, I'm noticing that growing up, it seemed, yes, it was two-sided. You have two sides pulling on the tug of rope. Who's going to let go first? But more and more, the more I walk into a room and there's somebody talking about politics, even if there's Republicans and Democrats in the room, we can all pretty much assume that Trump's not liked. That's most rooms though that I walk in. So I'm pretty good right now, at least of protecting myself from that. But it seems like also the people who do love Trump, everybody that they know and hang out with tend to love Trump. Does that make sense?
You've got to remember too, and this is something that's an interesting quandary. There's a lot of people who like and support Trump, but are afraid to say it because they will be attacked. And you've seen that. The classic Trump was never meant to win the election. All the polls showed. And the thing is, if you're an avid Trump supporter, but you're afraid to speak it, someone rings you and says, "Who are you going to vote for?" You're probably not going to say Trump because there is that fear, and that was reflected in the 2016 election. It's probably not so much now. I think that, and this isn't me. Look, if I was in the US, I wouldn't vote because I think they're both terrible. But I've got to tell you, I think you've got 4 more years of him.
I think you're right.
and even though the polls aren't showing that, but we had a similar thing in Australia where our right-wing party won the last election, but the polls showed they weren't going to. Brexit was never meant to happen, but it did. So people are generally not as comfortable speaking out. And you know, I think people on the right, generally, if you're more conservative and proper conservative as opposed to the flag waving style that we have portrayed as conservative that really isn't, most conservative people tend to keep their politics to themselves. Or they'll agree to get on with the conversation. You know, if I was I know one thing I struggled with when I first came to the community, being right leaning, I was so concerned with things I'd say, and there was times where I'd make a comment and I'd get piled on. So I just stopped saying things. Now I just don't care. It's, people want to pile on me, they can pile on me. But when I first came into the community, that was absolutely something that I held back on a lot of my genuine thoughts. And look, I'm going to say this, I wouldn't vote for Trump. I don't think his policies are good. I don't think I wouldn't vote for the other guy either. It's a very quick solution. Very quick solution. I can tell you exactly how you can fix this problem in the US. Bring in mandatory voting. The problem is if you've got compulsory voting, most people sit in the centre. Most people sit in the sensible centre. Now you had 50% of people who were eligible who voted at the last election. That means there's 50% of people who don't care, who probably just sit in the centre. And what you're going to find is the politics will go away from those extremes and move into the centre, because the most vocal people politically are the people on the extremes of every side. You don't get passionate, vocal, I'm a centrist kind of people. You get I'm conservative right, or I'm progressive left. Most people sit in the middle.
Yeah. So for the record, I think Biden and Trump both suck. Like, it's pretty
most
sad
people agree
that out of all of America, those are our two choices. Like,
I don't think we're usually going to like who ends up in those seats necessarily. I saw it put a really good way in a meme where it's like, think of it like a bus stop. Like this isn't going to be the king that you've been waiting for. This is us trying to get to the next stop.
Right.
Who's the safest person of who's available to get us to the next stop, and then we can try to adjust it as we go.
Awesome. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for doing this, but now I'd like to let everyone give a chance to say where they can check you out. So check you out. So starting with Cindy Plaza.
So I can be found on your channel because all my content has been published on your channel, Ethan. I've been invited on the Them show also a few times. So right now that's it. In the future, it might change. I'm thinking about producing some content. And also, if I'm lucky and if I succeed in what I'm trying to do, I will be a critical thinking teacher in a few weeks here in Belgium.
Awesome. Okay. Peter, who also has the coolest background I have seen. Yeah. Like, I need something like that. That is so awesome.
Well, we'll work on that. We'll work on that. No problem. So pretty much everything is here already. Where can people find me? On Twitter. And we do have a website, which is one page, and it's a picture of the logo you see spinning. That's the worst graphics that you will find, I think, anywhere on the internet is our webpage. We're on YouTube. YouTube.com, gonna go for it, which is behind me. That's not just me. As I said, I've got 3 amazing co-hosts: Robert Reed, Lilith Liberated, and Artemis Brain Sample. And then I think we've got the entire diversity that we needed summed up in those 4 people. We talk to theists, and every once in a while we do have a show called Herding Cats, where we talk to atheists. So come check us out.
Thank you, Peter. Tanjil.
I've only just recently started a very poor quality YouTube channel called The Angry Aussie Atheist, where I'll be addressing all the harm that I see that come from religion. Otherwise, you'll see me as a moderator in all of the ACA Facebook groups.
You don't seem angry.
I am. I might not express it in a way that's recognizable as anger, but yeah, I'm definitely very angry.
All right. Jenna, who was kind enough on literally last second notice to jump in midstream. Thank you, Jenna.
No problem. Thank you for asking me. I have a YouTube channel on YouTube called Jenna Belk. So it's just www.youtube.com/Jenna Belk. But I have a show called Atheist Stasis where I try to do things kind of like this, where I'm discussing things from a new perspective, but I'm also trying to learn. So some of it's a little more educational, tackling some of that education that we talked about is missing. And I'm also on Facebook. So it should be pretty easy to find if you just look up Jenna Belk on Facebook and shoot me a message and I'll chat with you.
And Jenna, if you look at the description, she is one of my recommended channels. So I highly recommend checking her out.
Yay!
All right, Atheist Pastor.
Cool. Easiest place to find me is on Twitter, atheist_pastor. I do have a YouTube channel, which is Atheist Pastor /Hereticals. We're going through a bit of a brand change at the moment. So every Friday night, my time, which is Friday morning for those of you in the US, or about lunchtime in Europe, we've got what we call Friday Night Six Pack, which the theory behind Friday Night Six Pack is we want to discuss serious topics within the atheist community while having a couple of drinks. All the best problems in the world seem to be solved while having a couple of beers. So that's the thought. And look, if you like panels, it's probably a good one for you because we've always six pack is because we've got 6 people in there. I've also on a Wednesday we run a show called Conspiracies, which is where my best mate, who's a flat earther, has a conversation with Jay, who's a conspiracy debunker, about different conspiracies. They look at it from different angles. Really interesting sort of study in how brains work and I guess religious beliefs work. So, but apart from that, the main purpose of my channel and what I do is to provide a place for people to come. So what I say is, if you are in religion, out of religion, and you need a community, you need to connect with people, get in touch. And even if I'm not the right person, I'll put you in touch with the right people to connect with. Because I think ultimately, when people get out of religion, they do lose that sense of community. We just want to provide that for them.
Thank you, Chris. I do want to thank all of you for being a part of this. These are always fun and I think a great learning experience. So I appreciate everyone who came, did the panel, and spent the time talking.
Thanks for putting it together.
Thank you.
Make sure you like, subscribe, do all the fun stuff. Thank you to my patrons. Wait, hang on. Here we go. Cindy Plaza. Thank you, Cindy. And Trina Deluca. And special thanks to Puck and BestName Ever. And Jenna Belk, I just want to publicly thank you because you were the first person to give me a chance and do an interview with me. And you've been great. So Jenna, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And yeah, do all that, like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Check out all these great channels. And most importantly, stay safe, stay healthy, and have a good night.